Welcome to Monday Motivations, 52 Weeks to a More Purposeful You. Corry Mendoza here, and I have my great friend, Jody Stevens. I'm so excited to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about the perfect game, which is week 16 or chapter 16 in Monday Motivations, 52 Weeks to a More Purposeful You. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my friend who I just adore. I met Jody. We were both speakers at a women's conference called Sisters in the Spirit. And I think it was the first one was Cultivate Courage.
Yeah.
You were there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year we did Cultivate Identity. And
Yes.
you have a great, it's a training program, right?
Uh-huh.
Training on.
Yeah, it's a course on identity or finding your God-given identity. And yeah, it's funny because I wrote that after speaking at the conference because I was like, because a lot of people are doing courses. So I was like, oh, I could make a course out of this. Yeah. So I did.
Yeah. No, that's, I think that would be a really great course for people. I just started exploring internal family systems, IFS. Are you into that from your schooling? And
yeah, so what I'm working on is licensed alcohol drug counselor. And so you have the family systems of addiction and codependency. And so you've probably read about the different roles that kids play when they come from addicted alcoholic family systems. So there's like a whole family systems, what they call modality or causes of addiction, which is, I don't know if that's similar to what you're studying.
It's actually different from my, I'm just starting to learn about this stuff, but it's more about yourself, like your internal family system within yourself. So anyway, we'll do another show on that. So but I'll do the official introduction. So Jody Stevens is founder of Genuine Life Recovery, which encompasses the Genuine Life Recovery podcast, blog, and public speaking to help people overcome addiction and codependency. In addition, she has been a radio show host.
Or you could just say a DJ.
There we go. And a voice-over artist and producer for 30 years. She currently works in her home studio where she records her podcast and does commercial and audio book production and narration. She has a BA in journalism and an MA in leadership. She is currently working on her second master's degree, an MS in addiction counseling, which will lead to her addiction counseling license. So very, very qualified person to have on the show to talk about the perfect game. So so off the bat, like, what did you get? What is the perfect game? Tell our listeners, what did you get on the perfect game?
So the way that I saw you describe it is just a wonderful way of turning something that's not so good into something positive, right? It's just like looking at the bright side, where if something happens, we say, okay, this is perfect, right? Because we know it, especially if we're looking at it from a biblical perspective, which I do, is that God works all things for the good, right? And so it's really just a way of actually what you've described in the perfect game, where we take something negative and turn it into something positive by saying it's perfect, is actually one of the earlier forms of just reframing or cognitive like behavioral therapy, where we look at, it's almost like a form of gratitude, where we look at the positive side of things, or we make something negative into what can I do to help myself to get through this, to make this something more positive. So I think that, I use it a lot in just practicing gratitude and saying, okay, right, everything's going to be okay. I'm going to get through this. It's right. So as opposed to saying it's just perfect, it's kind of the same concept that many of us use to try to bring meaning to things that are difficult and to work through difficult situations in our life. And ultimately, it can be very life-changing, because slowly we start to change our thought processes, our cognitive structures, the way we interact with people. So I found it to be just another great therapeutic technique to help us through. It's almost like a form of self-soothing, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so and I wrote this in 2010 or 11. So this was like what, 11, 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I still like the perfect game. So I love the idea. I think if I were to rewrite this now, I wouldn't use the word perfect, because not everything we can't find something perfect in everything. Like the loved one, we're not going to be like, oh, let me apply the technique of the perfect game on it. So, but it's really about, I kind of was inspired by this game, creating this game by my brother, Caleb. He's an artist, and he spilled some coffee on a blank sheet of paper. And we can all relate. Like if you spill coffee on your shirt, like spilled coffee is just annoying and frustrating.
Yeah.
And he ended up taking some ink and blending it with the coffee. And I actually created this old website called Coffee Art by Caleb Ledford. And he started making all this coffee art using coffee grounds and it's beautiful.
It was a Monet. He spilled the coffee and, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so from his art, it inspired me, where I was thinking every time something negative happens, like I hit the red light and now I'm going to be late for my first day back at William Jessup, which really happened. It's and so in the car, I'm like, well, how is this perfect? Like, how is this great? Like, what is the gift in this annoyance or this frustration? So, is that kind of how you interpreted it? Like you said, take the silver lining. Yeah. Can you think of a time when maybe you didn't use the word perfect, but can you think of a time even recently where something negative happened and you're like, here's what I like about this, or here's the benefit of this?
Yeah, I think, the way you describe it, it's something that I use every day, like for my whole life, because I am naturally, was a very negative person. So my joke is, well, the glass wasn't just half empty. There was nothing in it. Like, that's my joke. Right. And as someone who's been sober 16 years, I learned this concept of gratitude, which it literally saved my life. I like to say gratitude saved my life, but a lot of what you're talking about is finding the perfect, like this is just perfect, everything's going to work out, is very much, I think, in a deeper sense, it's a form of gratitude. It's a form of thankfulness that can change everything. Like recently, I was telling you, I was just getting over a cold. Well, I'm starting a new job next month. I'm doing this podcast. I'm taking 2 classes, which started the very day that I got sick. And then I was telling you, I started ski coaching the little kids up at the mountain, downhill skiing. Well, I'm an older coach. A lot of the coaches are right there, like they could be my kids. So you've got that going on. And then so then I get sick and I'm brand new. And so the second weekend, I have to basically, and so I'm trying to bargain with this, like, well, maybe I'll just drink some Theraflu and it'll be fine and no one will know. That wasn't going to work. I was like floored sick. And so finally, in the same concept of saying this is perfect, it's almost, not only is it a form of gratitude, but it's also kind of a form of surrender, because you're going to be late. You can't do anything about it. I'm sick. I can't, there's nothing I can do. So I can bewail and moan. But the reality is everything's going to shut down. My body's going to shut down. Podcast is going to shut down. I'm not going to be able to teach the kids. The old coach is going to ruin everything. It's like all this stuff going on. But then part of what you're describing is what's called reframing, because sometimes in our past, we are programmed to have this fear-based, like, everyone's going to hate me. I'm going to disappoint everyone. They're going to be like the old lady, all these things. So, but I surrender. I can't do anything about it. I email them. They reply, oh, no problem. I'm sorry you're sick. We'll cover for you, get better, which is how it's supposed to work. But a lot of times, if we come from issues and trauma, we're not used to people responding normally to normal things. You know what I mean? Like we're used to people being weird or manipulative. And so I have to always remind myself what's true. And what's true is I'm sick. It's no big deal. They responded normally. It ended up being just perfect because my classes started. So I got to lay in bed for 2 days and read the ginormous, ridiculous amounts of reading that you have in a master's program. I'm pretty much caught up on things. And the 2 kids that I had the first week were falling all over the mountain and screaming and having I mean, it was crazy. So they're probably more like caught up now. So the reality was that it really ended up being perfect, that I got sick. So, in a nutshell, it was really just, and now that since I'm starting the new job next month, I'll be over being sick. I don't think I got COVID. So there was a lot of silver linings. So in the end, it ended up being perfect. And now I'm here and I'm getting over my cold. So, really, when I look back at it, I see that the timing really was perfect.
Well, and I was just going to say, hindsight is 2020, and it's easy for us to find the perfect in. I have to write one. I keep writing things down because my brain is like sparking all these like, oh, I want to say this. Or
yeah.
Anyways, but yeah. So hindsight is 2020. So a lot of times when we look back, we can find the positive. It's much easier to find the positive in the past.
Yeah.
And what the perfect game is also about is finding the positive in the present. Finding the positive in the present. And then I'm also going to say, sometimes we can't find the positive in the present. Or I'm just kidding. I'm not going to make that joke. Okay. If we can't find the positive in the present, we can say, what can this become? Or what is the opportunity? So it's like the spilled coffee, so the perfect game is about coming from a place of, I have this attitude and I have this technique of, I'm going to find how this is perfect. And also I'm going to find the opportunity, because in that moment is when it's really where the rubber meets the road. Like, how can we do this? I thought of another thing. How about, Jody, what do you think when somebody else spilled their coffee, if and they're upset? Like, what ideas do you have about how can you help them find the positive? Because it can be very annoying when we're upset and then somebody's like, well, look at the silver lining. Like, how can we tell them to look at the silver lining without not having empathy and making it worse by shifting it?
Yeah, I think really when things are difficult, there has to be, if it's just something like being late, spilling coffee, getting a cold, that's one thing. When it's, like when my brother died of addiction, right? It's kind of hard to say, oh, this is perfect. Right. But he passed away studying to become an alcohol and drug counselor, and now I'm doing it. And there's been healing. And so looking back, was it perfect? No. It's never going to be perfect. It's never, it never should have happened. If we look at it from a biblical perspective, there's millions of things that should not happen, but because of the fall, we're all subject to all these bad things, and they are going to happen. But God said, I have overcome the world. So I look at it as eventually it will all be okay, right? And it may not be okay in this life, but in dealing with other people that are struggling, I think that there's a process of, you can't get the silver lining until you at least grieve it, talk about it. You have to listen to someone, like, how are you feeling? How does this affect you? I understand, right? All these sorts of things before you can then start to, right, to look for the silver lining. If it's something really traumatic, that's going to take time for somebody to be able to see it, right?
Yeah.
It's just not gonna, it's not going to happen overnight, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But ultimately they will find good in it. But I think just being there, being present, and because if you try to find the silver lining too soon, well, now that's not therapeutic, right? Because now you're stuffing and you're avoiding the grief. So it's really processing the grief, the emotion, the anger, the sadness, whatever it is. What I would more try to do with someone who was really more traumatic is to try to work with them on how do we work through this in a way that's not damaging.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in a way that's where we're not yelling and screaming, or we're not, in my case, getting drunk, we're not using, because in addiction recovery, one of the biggest causes of relapse is negative emotions. So that's why what you're talking about is so therapeutic, at least in the moment of looking for the positive. What can we learn? The silver lining, because it's just a way to try to regulate our emotions, especially in the moment or whatever, even if it's like a panic attack where we stop and go, I'm going to be okay. This is perfect. It's going to be okay. Then we work on some breathing exercises, or we go for a walk, or we do some, cognitive stuff, and we can do that in the moment and then come back and process, right, the negativity or, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm getting all therapeutic on you.
No, I love it. I love it because it's necessary, because if we take this topic as a standalone solution that is a blanket cover to all problems, that would be ridiculous.
Right.
And so it's good to put it in context of how can we use it, and then when it's not a right time to apply this. Right now, I am taking a class at William Jessup, The Problem of Suffering and Evil, and I'm at the very beginning of it, and we're going over different worldviews. And I found it very interesting that pretty much every culture since the beginning of time has seen suffering as a part of life that's unavoidable. And every culture, every people group has had a method that they train their culture on how to handle suffering. So they have a belief system around what is suffering, why is it there? And then they have a cultural norm of how to handle it. And then in our 21st century Western culture, we have a little bit more of a scientific and medical approach, which is avoided at all costs. And hire an expert to make it go away. And then now we're getting into like another worldview or another view of how to handle it, which is essentially to embrace it, to lean into it and find meaning in it. And you mentioned finding meaning in the beginning of this talk. Can you speak a little bit more about finding meaning in suffering and pain, disappointment, betrayal, those types of things that affect our lives?
Yeah, I think we have a choice, like we look at like Job, right? He's the greatest example of someone who had the worst kind of suffering, but it says in all of this, Job did not curse God. And then God restored everything back to him and, tenfold, and everything worked out better. Okay. It doesn't always work that way, right? But I think ultimately there's a choice that we all have to make. And I remember facing this choice where, oh my gosh, it was like such a bad time where my brother had died. There was betrayal there. And even from the church, like I was like the church wound. I was like, I was ready to die. Like I was done. And then I was done with God. And I've told this story at Cultivate where I was like, I'm doing morning drive at a Christian station and I get there and, Toby Mags, you're all up in, and I'm just angry. And then I got to turn on the mic and hallelujah, and yeah, praise Jesus. But I remember, and I was going through what's called a major depressive episode and in my life, and a lot of us go through that. And I ended up in therapy and I remember the therapist saying to me, why would you let someone steal your relationship with God, even if it is the church? And it was like, and that was kind of a pivotal thing and then I thought of the Job thing and I thought, okay, so I have a choice. I can just be done with God and be angry and be bitter and everything's imperfect, right? Or I can stick it out, press in towards God, because either way, it's not going to change. Mm-hmm. The situation is what it is. So that's where this acceptance, where we just, God grant me the serenity to accept what I can't change. So I can't change it. So then it was like, okay, God, I can't live with you. I can't live without you. But I ended up sticking it, out with God. And then the real blessings came and God opened the door for me to get the first master's at William Jessup. And it was leadership, which I learned so much about just dealing with people and organizations. And, there were problems with my job at say, like all these things. And so, and then later on, I was able to look at all the emotional triggers, why I needed to have all those betrayals and those things happen so God could remove this kind of need for approval. There was a lot of codependency issues and low self-esteem issues that final wound ripped it all away to where now I'd love people's approval, but I don't need it anymore. And so it was very healing, but sometimes you have to be to the point where you're almost dead. And I think that sometimes, this probably sounds awful, but sometimes I think suicidal stuff is almost God's way of ripping out the false self. Like, it's like, that who you used to be, for me, the entertainer, the one that got all that approval is gone. She's dead. She's been crucified. And that crucifying was so hard. They talk about it, the dark night of the soul. I think you might have heard of that in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro. That helped. Like, that was what I related to, where I walked through that. And then I found the meaning of it. Like, while it was happening, I didn't get it. I didn't understand how could all this stuff happen. But now I see on the other side why it emotionally, it needed to happen. It needed to happen that way. And then as a thinker, a deep person, I do tend to look for meaning in things. Not everybody does. I do tend to like, what did I learn? What did I, I'm like psychoanalytic. I would have loved Freud back in the day, and not everybody needs to do all that, but I do think it is very important to find meaning, because then we have, like, a lot of trauma. And you could be super cynical. You could be very different than who you are, but you made a choice. Part of having a successful life is how we decide, like Job, to go forward with suffering. Do we wallow in it, or do we keep suiting up and showing up, as they say in AA? know?
Well, I love it. It is a choice. And there's two things I want to touch on that you mentioned. That, you mentioned you're a person that does have a bent towards finding meaning in everything. And I do too. And it's really eye-opening to me. I'm just now starting to learn about Stoicism, and that there is actually a worldview where there is no meaning. Like, that is the belief, that is the worldview, that things are just, they are what they are. Some people have a negative fate, some people have a positive fate. So I am two things. I'm grateful that I don't have to try to find meaning. I do find meaning. And then number two, I want to be sensitive to other people that currently don't find meaning in things, and meet them where they are. Because if I can't find meaning, then I will be in despair. So I need to meet others in their despair. And it goes back to the choice, having awareness that, so all of us listening, everyone listening, that's what I think would be great for us all to kind of like pause and ask yourself, do you have a belief system where you believe you can find meaning in even the most tragic, devastating thing? Like there's some way to find meaning inside of that. Or are you a person that you're like, there is no meaning, it sucks, that this is horrible, this is, and who cares what your current answer is? What I'm excited about is I now realize there's these little boxes that I can, if you name it, you can tame it type of thing. Like, I can actually name, this is my current worldview. And then that opens up choice. Do I still want to keep seeing it this way? And do you want to comment anything on what I just shared? Otherwise I have something else to say.
No, I was just going to say that, like, okay, so we're people that look for, deeper meaning and stuff. And again, not everybody's like that. And I think that's okay.
Yeah,
I think like in the therapeutic world, it's very much, there's different types of helping people based kind of on their personalities. So based on someone's personality, some people don't like to go digging into their past, and that's okay. But it's looking at what's going to work for you, because things aren't going well now. Maybe someone's very negative, they're on, things like that. So how do we help you so that you can, if it's not find meaning, at least respond to things more positively, work on some better coping skills, right? Sometimes it's just, some people just want, that's where they developed all this cognitive behavioral stuff, because, in our world, it's like, oh, we got to go get a quick fix, so
right.
So let's work
21st century Western culture method is avoid suffering at all costs.
Right.
Avoid it, numb it, distract it, minimize it.
Your insurance only covers 4 sessions. I mean, that's literally how it is. So they try to figure out, how can we help someone in 4 sessions? But I do think if you can, like what you're doing, the perfect game, this is perfect. Finding the good in things, it does reprogram how you start to relate to people and how you respond to things. And I think slowly, as you start changing your responses, then you can slowly begin to heal. So it is another way. It's just not they're on the couch, where we're going to go all the way back and psychoanalyze. And, that's how I would do things, but that's not how everybody wants to do it. And that's okay too. It's just like trying to figure out like what works for people, and so, but I think in general, as humans, we are all on this quest and search for meaning. And I think finding meaning is actually, it while it may not be a therapeutic technique, it's pretty universal thing of finding meaning, I think,
Yeah. I want to circle back on one more thing, and then we'll start to land this plane. So kind of going back to the story of Job, everything was stripped from him, and he goes through this period, and then everything's restored, double. And the truth is, his family's still dead. So even though things were rebloomed, he's still finishing his life with elements of suffering that will continue. And I can relate to that, because some of our losses are irrevocable, whether it be like a death or a loss. For me, it was a loss of period of time with my children. And inside of that, there's a lot more losses and things that will never be restored. But when we can find the beauty, and okay, so what's still, and I cannot use the word perfect with that scenario, but what can still be awesome. And one thing is, my son, he's in the Navy, and he texted me yesterday and he goes, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Mom, but the name of my station is, I wrote it down someplace. It's like I forget all the letters, but Corry Station. Spelled
Wow.
exactly like I spell my name. I'm like, what are the chances my son that was alienated from me, now he's 18, he's in the Navy, reunited with me, and he's at a station where every day he's seeing my name. Like, so it's not necessarily finding meaning in why did all those years happen? Why, it's more about, I probably would think it was, say those 8 years never happened. I'd be like, oh, that's so cool. You're at a station with your mom's name. Like, no, now it's like, I mean, like, it means so much to me. It's huge. And there's so much joy and I have this deep joy and this deep gratitude from that. So
yeah.
Pretty cool, huh?
Well, and I don't think, we've never lived in a world with just joy and no suffering, but I don't know that there would ever be joy without suffering. I really, I'm not sure that it's possible.
Yeah.
Because what's there to be joyful and thankful for if it weren't for grief and suffering?
Yeah.
It's not something we would ever know. But I think like what you went through with your kids, there's always going to be a hole. I remember for me, it was always kind of trying to find that approval, I think more like the male authority figures kind of daddy wound or stuff. Wasn't that my dad wasn't there. He was just distant and things like that. But I remember, this professor who was a psychologist at William Jessup saying, I think his name was Wadlow or something. He's since retired, but he said that God isn't, we have the God-shaped hole, but God isn't the one that fills the daddy wound, the mommy wound, the daughter, the kid wound. Like, I'll have a hole because I've never had kids. He said, God's job isn't to fill that. His job is different. And maybe some people don't agree with that, but what he said was that once we understand that, we understand, like I understood, okay, I'm searching for this thing, and I finally realized I'm not going to find it. It's not going to get filled. And he said, he says, but you can still go on and have a good life and a whatever, a healthy life or whatever, but you're always going to have that hole. But now you understand it and you don't have to keep striving, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you kind of just give it up. And that was really therapeutic for me because I was like, oh, okay, I get it. It's not meant to be filled, not in this lifetime. So it's, and I think that's where the joy comes, where you can have so much joy for your son because you went through this grief. So you still have that hole, but then you have this deep joy because now that grief is being stroked or something, you know what I mean? Like, it's never going to heal, but it's being I don't even know the right word. It's being it's almost like God's giving you a hug or something like that. You know what I mean? Maybe, right? And it just doesn't get any better than that. It's just not in this lifetime, right? So
it's like one of the programs I went through, it's called Community for Peace, and it was for domestic violence, and the one of the leaders one time, she said, we're always going to have a hiccup in our giddy up.
Yeah.
Right. And then Dan Allender has a book called Leading with a Limp. And it's even kind of like, I have a little chip on my tooth. And it's like, I could get that chip fixed, and I've wanted to get it fixed for a long time. And every time I tell, my husband or my mom or somebody, they're like, no, it gives you character. And it's like, these hiccups in our giddy up, the hole, the void, the irrevocable things in our lives, even though we wish it was different, as soon as we can say, okay, it's not perfect, but I can find meaning.
Yeah.
Then I think it gives us two gifts. Number one, I think it opens up a whole new cul-de-sac of gratitude. If I was just on the perfect drive, like life is all going my way, like you said, I wouldn't have the gratitude because I wouldn't know the joy without the suffering. And then the other thing I think that it gives us, and we didn't even touch on it, so we got to have you back on the show, and I want to touch on this next time, or maybe even speak to this, is the empathy.
Yeah.
Before going through that tragic time, there's a lot of things that I just purely was not capable of having empathy over. And now I can relate to, I can relate to lots of different other losses that I would have never been able to relate to before. So that's finding my meaning. So in closing, the last thing I always like to end the show with is, what is the advice that you give to yourself and you would share with others about the perfect game?
Well, advice to people. I think, first of all, if it's something that you're really, really struggling with, it's don't isolate, right? Get help, which is probably a lot deeper than right, saying everything's going to be perfect, right? But I mean, so I think, again, finding the meaning, finding the silver lining is huge, and probably just understanding that this is a work in progress, because what captivated you about it was probably something that took a long time. So, like, for me to find the positive, the good, the gratitude, the perfect game, that everything's going to be perfect, it's still not perfect. I don't do the perfect game perfectly, right? It's taken me half a lifetime, honestly, to get there, and I've had a lot of help along the way. So it's in doing that, but then also reaching out to other people for help, and then ultimately working toward a resolution, right? You know what I mean? It's like something bad can happen, and you can have a fit of anger, you can be upset, you can go through all that, but ultimately, so it's not like immediately we say everything's perfect, but do we eventually arrive there? I guess would be my advice is, like when I quit my job and we moved here to Reno, it was a year and a half of just nothing. Everything I did, the doors closed. Every door closed. Now they're starting to open. Why did it take a year and a half? I don't know. And it was really hard. There was a lot of tears. I wanted to give up. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of, what have I done? Why am I here? My poor husband had to, because it was funny, because the seas just parted for him. We moved here and just everything was working perfect for him. And for me, it was nothing. I mean, it was just like nothing, like everything I did just was not working, and don't know why it happened that way. And it was really hard to come to that. This is just perfect, but I had to keep cutting, right? It's like every single day I had to, or every few days, right? We all get to wallow in our self-pity for a little while, right?
Yes.
But I had to keep moving forward, because looking at everything in a negative way is going to affect your opportunities. It's going to affect your job. It's going to affect everything. So that's why playing this perfect game, at the very least, it gives you hope to keep trying, because, life is also just a numbers game in a sense. If it's jobs or marketing or whatever, if you just keep putting it out there, somebody eventually is going to respond. And I was starting to think, this is a black hole. Well, I told you I have a job coming up with a treatment center where I'm going to be doing a podcast and some media for them, and we'll be able to get my license through them. And so it all ended up working out, but I had to play the game imperfectly, I guess, and just keep getting back up. Because, I would wallow. I can wallow and I can be really negative and what's up, God, you don't care about me, but then I have to, sorry, apologize, and then go back to the gratitude. Like, I didn't die from COVID. We have a wonderful house. So it is perfect. It really is perfect compared to what a lot of people are going through. So that was probably some weird disjointed advice, but
no, I love
it makes sense.
I love it. And I'm going to sum it up. So basically what Jody's saying is play the imperfect game imperfectly.
Yeah, the perfect game imperfectly.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And you gave us 2 examples of how it plays out in real life, how it imperfectly plays out. You getting sick and having to call in. And then afterwards, you were able to find meaning for that short-term imperfect situation. And then now you gave us a bigger example of a year and a half of not being able to find meaning in it. But keep playing the game again and again, so you get to the finish line. And then now I bet you next time you're on the show, you're going to be like, okay, I have a story. I found more meaning why it took 8 months. Yeah. So for everybody that just adored Jody as much as I do, check her out at jodystevens.com. And that's, jodystevens.org. And I'm going to spell it because she spells her name Jody, Jodie, Stevens with a V.org. And you could find her podcast there, her audiobook offerings. I might be asking you to help me with putting my book on audio. So we'll talk about that later. So everybody tune in every Monday for Monday Motivations. Let's see, next week, we will be talking about intention. So have a great week, everyone. And thank you again, Jody. And we will see you.